name, first off, is Terence Trouillot. I'm the senior editor of Frieze magazine. Happy to be here. Happy to be here with Oliver and Barbara. Before I introduce both of you, I just want to say I'm going to moderate a conversation between the two of you. Hopefully I don't talk too much. Do let me know. We'll talk for about 30 or so minutes and then open the conversation to the audience for about 15 minutes. Afterwards, there will be a performance by Oliver, so stick around for that. And then it'll be over and we'll have fun. Great. So first off, I'm going to read some intros. I'll start with Oliver. Oliver Beer creates sculptures, installations, videos, immersive live performances that reveal the hidden properties and musicality of objects, bodies, and architectural sites. His social and familiar relationships often become the blueprint for multidisciplinary works that engage with intimate and universal concerns, such as the transmission of musical memories and the personal and cultural meanings invested in the objects we possess. And then Barbara London, is a New York-based curator and writer who founded the Video Media Exhibition and Collection Program at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where she worked between 1973 and 2013. Her current projects include the book Video Art, The First 50 Years, Fade in 2020, and the podcast series Barbara London Calling, and the exhibition Seeing Sound, Independent Curators International 2020 to 2024. Great. So I'd like to begin first, and I think we'll just go through the exhibition and talk about all the works in the exhibition, including the works downstairs. But to start off with, I'd love to hear a little bit from Oliver about the sort of idea behind Cat Orchestra, which, from my understanding, is a continuation of your work that you did at the Metropolitan Museum in 2019, where you worked with the collection there and used different vessels, objects, dating from prehistory to contemporary objects, and amplified their sort of, and correct me, I'm probably going to butcher the name of this, but the Helmholtz resonance, the sort of internal pitch of each object. And this is happening here with the cat vessels. And so I'd love to hear kind of the genesis story behind that. And then, correct me if I'm right, Barbara, you saw the work at the Met as well, correct? So I'd love to hear also from you your experience from that work versus this work, if that makes sense.
Sure. Thank you, Terence. Thank you, Barbara, for being here. I'd also just like to thank Almine Rech Gallery for doing something kind of difficult, which is bringing 37 cats halfway around the world. It might look simple, but it's been a real adventure making this installation and this show. So thank you for having us and making this possible. Cat Orchestra. Why would I do that? There is, as you say, like a resonance to objects, and since I was young, I always had a particular sensitivity to music, and to not just to music, but to the harmony and notes that can be found in the world around us. And it sounds really simple to say it, and yet like almost self-evidence, but you can't make a vessel without making a musical note. You can't make a wine glass without making a specific musical note, and that note depends on the form of the vessel that you're making. And this was something I was always kind of conscious of. Like if you pour me a glass of wine, I can hear the key of the glass changing and the key of the bottle changing as you pour it out. But I guess it goes much deeper. It's something it sounds esoteric, but it's actually an incredibly important part of the way we experience the world. We are conditioned to see everything. We're conditioned to look ever more with even the format of the objects that we use to interact with the world. It's all about looking and not about listening. And what this installation works with, and what the installation at the Met works with, is actually something that we all know and we all hear, and yet we almost all completely oblivious to, which is that every time you make an object, you're making a piece of music or a piece of harmony. And every time you build a room is just like a huge seashell. It has its own innate sound, its own innate tonality. And yet architects are not taught that they're building music, and potters are not taught that they're making notes. So the Cat Orchestra is 37 cats. I listened to thousands of cats to find 37 cats, literally thousands, to find 37 that would sing in perfect harmony with each other, 3 octaves. Inside every cat there's a microphone, and the keyboard that you can see in front of it doesn't make any sound at all. It just turns on the microphones when you press down the keys. So when you press down the middle C, turns up the volume on the middle C cat, and you hear it sing. And so as you play, or when it's even playing automatically, it's just turning on the microphones, and you're just hearing the sound that was already inside the object. And at the Met, it was concerts with everyone from Philip Glass to Nico Muhly. Here, it's open for anyone to play, and a bit more free.
Yeah, I wonder, Barbara, can you, having seen the show at the Met and seeing the show here, speak a little bit about the differences or similarities?
Well, there's a big difference. I mean, I actually was an intern at the Met long time ago, so knowing that museum and the different departments and how territorial they are, so I understood, without knowing you, what you must have gone through to get the permission to test some of those objects. So they were historic and historical. Like here, they cross culture, which you have Asia, you have Northern Europe, and whatever. Then you've got funky stuff that's like not Mickey Mouse, but you've got pop, so it goes high and low. And like at the Met, like here, then we've got in quote, the decorative arts. We're going to hear you perform, but I also heard the piece being played by musicians, so that was quite fascinating. Yeah, so I made an effort. Because I love sound, and I'm fascinated. I think sound is something that comes right into our brain long before we do the visual. So that's of great interest to me, and like what you're doing with sound in different ways is fascinating. So.
Yeah, I wonder, and I'll direct this to you, Barbara, since you did have the first sound art show at MoMA in 1979, aptly called Sound Art, and working with artists using synthesizers and using sound like that. I wonder, just in relation to Oliver's work, what you've seen has changed in that regard, or how his work might differ from the work that you've worked with in the past.
Well, culture keeps changing, technology keeps changing. You're of a much younger generation than, of course, the people I worked with early on. So it's like the world just keeps changing. But I think there's something in your work, Oliver, it's very poetic. There's a real poetry in there. And I think that's what I always look for in work is I want my soul to be fed. And in a way, I think that's partly what you do. So I don't know if that answers.
Yeah. No, it does, absolutely. Maybe we could talk a little bit, because I'm curious, again, this obsession with cats, and I don't think we talked about it enough, but the sort of idea of the inspiration behind the work, and Kircher, is that right? Kircher's, I forget the name of it, but it's Klatzen-Clavier, is that right? So this theoretical instrument from the 16th century that used, or it intended to use trained cats and a keyboard And so that's clearly, obviously the inspiration behind that. But I'm wondering how you kind of, landed on this, or again, the sort of obsession with cats as well.
The cat piano was an idea by this polymath called Athanasius Kircher, 17th century guy, very much like Da Vinci, but he got enough stuff wrong that everyone forgot about him. But he invented this cat piano as a concept, and it was such a strong concept that it's just traveled through history. I went through every book dealer in London and Paris to find the book that you can find just on the right as you walk in, which shows an illustration of cats in cages with their tails under the keys of a piano, and as you press down the keys, they scream in approximate cat pitch from low to high. And it's just one of those things, those ideas that grabs hold of people and survives through centuries, and you wonder what it is about the cat. And it's probably the same impulse that has us all watching billions of cat videos every year. There is something you said about feeding your soul. There's something about these little souls of these little animals and hearing them sing as well. Like, these are the perfect objects to have a voice. They all have eyes, they all have a mouth and a face, and it seemed like the most natural thing in the world to, actually, let me show you. This may or may not work, but let's see if this, like, you can hear that note lives in this vessel. I think if I mic it up, that's the note of that vessel. And this will probably have a higher note. Yeah. And that is all that's happening over there. And so when you're auditioning a cat, you can just hold the mic up to its mouth and listen to it. And it is funny how it's such. I think it's important to for me, in my process, to go beyond a phenomenon, like the phenomenology of sound. And what happens when you look at an object and you hear a sound, a voice coming out of it? What does it, not only what does it mean to hear it, but then what do you do with it? When you put them together and you listen to thousands of cats to find the ones that sing in harmony, this was like it was at the Met, the relationship between a 7,000-year-old vessel at the Met and a Betty Woodman from 2003. There's no formal relationship, but they sing a perfect octave with each other, and they both say something about what we are doing with our bodies and with literally the earth, in this case with ceramic. We're forming these shapes, and when we form these shapes, we're making music, and we can't not make music when we do that. And the really fascinating thing I found at the Met was that, having listened to thousands of objects in the Met's collection, there were some musical notes, like an E flat, the middle E flat, that kept coming back again and again. When I couldn't find some notes at all, that note kept coming back. And it makes you think about the relationship between all of these different cultures. Why are we making that note? Is it the radius of the arm as we're making that object? Or is it the volume that we need? And so I guess although I start with something which seems very formal and very phenomenological, when you start listening to these objects, they start telling you things that you could never have known if you were just looking at them. And I think it's right. The Met was a pain in the ass. Trying to make them work in this way with their objects was so radical. The hierarchies of objects all completely broken down and showing ancient Near East alongside modern America.
But I think that's the beauty of a museum like the Met. MoMA does it, and I know other museums do it too, where inviting an artist like you are invited to break down the hierarchy. And I think that's very a special situation.
Having said that they were a pain in the ass, I should say that I'm very grateful.
I did hear.
I'm very grateful that they did let me do that. And it was, and it was 3 years of working with them to reach that point. And in those 3 years, I didn't touch a single object. I listened to everyone, but didn't touch a single thing, It was...
And then here, where you've got, that many of us have had cats or have a cat. So here's this fuzzy-wuzzy thing that when we go home at night, it wraps around our legs or whatever. but then they're ferocious too. And then downstairs, you did the stop-action animation of a cat on the keyboard. I hope you all go downstairs and see it. But it made me think a lot, because I know you studied film in Paris, made me think of Chris Marker, because Chris used the image of a cat as like a signature. So the whole thing of this cat, cats are curious. And then that clavier where the cats are getting, their tails are getting hit as an idea. So it's like a society, we have the people who are on top and the people who are down below. And it's fascinating culture.
Yeah, it's true. And the symbolism of the cat, making this piece, finding 37 objects from different origins, the symbolism in Japan for the cat, the maneki neko cat, for example, or the cat that's drunk on absinthe right in the middle from early 20th century France. In every culture, the cat takes on an importance of some kind, and it can be a really like spooky negative importance, or it can be one bringing like for wealth and fortune. But what's amazing is that there's not a single culture that doesn't put its own stamp on it. And the film that you can see downstairs, I hope you guys get a chance to go into the basement. You'll see an animation film that I've made with 200 kids from the UK. And I've taken that famous scene from the Aristocats where the kittens are being forced to play their arpeggios. And they're like, fuck this, I'm going to cover the piano in paint and I'm going to make a complete mess. And it's the film itself, if you remember, is about this kind of clash of cultures between this aristocratic classical music and the street cats with their jazz. And Disney gives us this story along with so many other stories which become anchoring points for millions and millions of children. And a work like the one downstairs, what I've done is to print out the animation frames, image by image, and give each separate frame to a different child and say, you can trace this, but go completely wild and interpret it however you want. And of course, they've traced the forms, but the cats come back as like being stabbed to death cat, or angel cat, or electrocution cat, or amazing cat meme cat with a compilation of all the cat memes the child has ever seen in one page. And I've taken those images, scanned them, and printed them back onto celluloid film to project at the original speed, so 12 images per second. And that means every second you see 12 children's imaginations fly past, which you can almost barely perceive. And it becomes this violent and twisted version of something which is really culturally being imposed on us. Disney is a very powerful, very imperial force on children's imaginations around the world. And in some way I want this body of work. And actually I'm doing a show in the Museum of Modern Art in Paris in the autumn where I'll do this exact same process with important paintings from that collection. So this canon of modern art will be passing through the minds and the rebellions of thousands, about 4,000 Parisian children.
So is that something new that you've invited other people into the process? Or I know when I saw the piece at the Met, you invited musicians in to participate, but for the content, is that different?
I think I've always, because I was a musician, I was in a band for a long time, and I've always collaborated. And I think for me, a work is often like a score, where you offer something up, and it has something in its own right, it has its own entity, but it also has the potential to be completely transformed based on who you invite to interpret.
I wonder, because it's interesting in thinking about not only your sound pieces, but also working in time-based mediums. But I think it's a good segue to sort of think about these resonance paintings, which is kind of the inverse of what you're doing, particularly with the Cat Orchestra, and thinking about how you could use sound to paint on a canvas, so to speak.
All of the paintings you can see are part of this body of work I've been working on for about 4 years. I call them resonance paintings because I make them using the resonance of objects. And what I mean by that is that in my studio, I will lay a blank canvas horizontally, and I put a speaker, a pretty powerful speaker, underneath the canvas. And then I spent a long time trying to find the finest possible pigments in the world, which will move with the air when you play sound. So the speaker under the canvas moves the air into amazing geometric ripples and waves, and then the pigment takes on the shape of those waves because it's light enough that the air moves it. And this is something that's existed in science for a long time. People demonstrate it in universities with like a metal plate and sand on it. There's scientists like Chladni and Lissajous and Hook who demonstrated it. But for me, I'm not a scientist, I'm an artist. It was so incredible to see that no one had ever painted in this way. Every time I make a resonance piece, whether it's with vessels like this or like many of my pieces making architectural spaces sing with resonance, every time I've done that over the last more than a decade, the room is full of amazing geometry. Like in a minute when I play those cats and they're resonating, if you could see the air moving, you would see the most beautiful geometry suspended ephemerally all around us. It's a bit like when you throw a stone into a pond and you see perfect concentric circles coming out. Sound is very similar. You go to a concert and you're actually, when you hear harmony in a concert, if you could see the harmony, you would see that the air is forming these beautiful shapes. And these paintings are, if you like, what I've been seeing and feeling all of these years. It wasn't until the lockdown that I had the time to realize that actually expressing what I'm hearing visually would be a new way to paint. And then this body of work is, I think, the most controlled that I've ever managed. Like, it is a phenomenon. It has a real history of finding geometry, Lissajous, Chladni, etc. But this feels really like I've been able to paint using sound as the paintbrush and controlling exactly what I want. I know this very high note has made these very fine marks here, and there's a very low note that's created the composition that's behind it. And I think, originally I was thinking of people like Andy Warhol's piss paintings or Yves Klein's fire paintings, but it feels like for me it's gone beyond process and actually become like a method to paint. And a method, all of these paintings were made using the sound of the cats. So every single painting is a combination of the voices of these objects. And it took a while for me to realize how completely intertwined the visual and the acoustic really is.
I'm curious, why blue? Why this blue?
Yeah, the blue is a funny one because it's so completely compelling for people. The blue that we see in the sky, that we see in the ocean, we don't see it on land very much. It's this expansive, incredible color, very elemental and ethereal. But it's also, the cobalt blue of porcelain. And I've done so many pieces now, both with the Met and with in Korea, in England, using blue and white porcelain. And if you think of that color, there's not a country in the world that doesn't have blue and white porcelain somewhere. And my grandma gave me a blue and white pot before she died. And it got me thinking, how did that color get to me in Kent? What is it about that combination of blue and white that made it travel from Mesopotamia, 2000 BC, to China, to Korea, to Japan? If you follow it, you follow it through trade routes, you follow it through imperial routes. It's an incredibly charged color. And so as well as being very natural, it also, I know it's a bit like what I was saying about the cats. You present something which is very universal, but as soon as you put it in contact with human beings, it takes on an incredibly specific interpretation and history.
Yeah, I'm curious to know a little more for both of you. This is a question for both of you. It's something maybe you could sort of wrestle with together. But yeah, I'm curious if, for both of you, what brings you. I mean, you talked about sort of the oral aspect being sort of the first register to sort of a kind of artistic experience. But yeah, because I know your background is as a musician and all this. I'm wondering how and why, particularly when it comes to sound art or sound in general, why there's this need for both of you to sort of experience that or work through that through an artistic context, both, you know, as an artist and as a curator, respectively. Like, what brings you to that? And I guess, like, what are those challenges as well? Since, I mean, I think now it's arguably quite, you know, understood that sound art is very much part of the art world, but it still, I think, poses some challenges in terms of how we experience that or how we exhibit that as well.
Well, I'll give you an anecdote.
Please.
So I was obviously at MoMA for a while, and I knew Namjoon Paik, I knew Bill Viola, I knew many, many, many artists, and for them, I was curator of video and media, but we would always talk, and they would say, well, video is half sound, you know, that it's not just visual. But sound in a space, like you do all kinds of study and you've worked with it, sound is like water. Sound will go everywhere, and then how do you control it? So that was the conundrum as a curator, how to work with it. So I wanted to do a sound show, a big show in the late 70s, and Mama said, well, we're a visual museum. You know, basically, that was the attitude. So I did a sound show in a very small space that I was curating. So anyway, I did it. So yeah, and then finally, in 2013, I did a big sound show, and that was like a big kind of survey-ish. But I worked 2 years on that, and I worked with the AV crew for 2 years and the designer and everything to make it so it didn't go everywhere. Yeah, so.
It's funny you mentioned Chris Marker, and I studied theory of cinema at the Sorbonne many years ago, and there was a theorist there called Michel Chion, who writes about what he calls audio vision, which is a new sense at the meeting point of vision and hearing in the cinema in particular. He was a great theorist on that. And that was already a kind of inspiring part of my process to realize that people are thinking in this way about this fundamental relationship between what we see and what we hear. But something happened about 3 years ago. I'd always imagined and presumed that there would be a relationship between the paintings in Paleolithic caves and the sound that you experience, the resonance, specifically the resonance like I was finding in these objects. And I managed to get a visit into the famous Paleolithic cave in France, which is very hard to be inside because they count the amount of time, the amount of hours that you're breathing in there because your breath affects the paintings on the walls. They're 20,000 years old. And I went through with this amazing archaeologist, Jean-Michel Geneste, and he allowed me to explore and to sing, not only breathe, but to actually sing in this space. And what I discovered when I was there was that sound that you heard come out of the vessels, I can make it come out of the walls of the cave. If you sing the right note to the cave, it sings back to you much louder than you're singing to it. And it's an incredible feeling. It makes the hair stand back on the back of your neck. It's this enveloping, completely surreal experience. And I remember Jean-Michel looked at me and he was like, putain. And I was like, is that a good putain or a bad putain? It's a good putain. He'd been working for 30 years in this space and never before heard it sing in that way. It's a shocking and amazing feeling. And the really exciting thing was that I discovered a relationship between where the paintings are and where the musical notes of the cave are. And that means that they now believe they were almost certainly singing those notes 20,000 years ago, which makes it the oldest harmony that we have been able to think about. And for me, having spent my life intuitively knowing that visual art and music is not a separate thing, it's not a separate discipline or a separate entity, that it's fundamentally related. It was like a sort of, not a vindication of everything I've been doing, but like it made me feel that this impulse is actually in all of us. And these paintings, they're actually showing us something that we know, and that we know very, very deeply. And so, your question was like, how and why explore visual art through sound? I think it's because it's actually one of the most natural ways for us to experience the world, and it's one that we've lost in many ways. And it's not esoteric. It's actually all around us. And the beauty sometimes, whether it's a Chris Marker film or an installation by someone like Alvin Lucier, or is sometimes you can suddenly see something or hear something which was there your whole life, like it was for this archaeologist, and you just didn't know it was there. And for me, like that's those moments where you suddenly hear something that's not been heard or hasn't been heard for a long, long time, or you see something like this in harmony on canvas. That's why I do it.
I think I wanted to ask one more question before I go to the audience, and because I'd be remiss not to mention it, but hearing you speak, it's makes me think of your Recomposition series, which there are a few examples downstairs as well. And I want to talk about those in relation to what you just said in terms of this idea of experiencing art simultaneously through sound and visuals. And that work is specifically silent in some ways, although you talk, which I love, hearing, or when you say this, is that when objects sing, or these sort of inanimate things that are actually quite oral. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit, not only in terms of these works being quite personal, and you could describe a little bit about how you make them, but yeah, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the oral quality of those works that are ostensibly silent.
Yeah, so those two pieces downstairs. So if you guys get a chance, there was a film downstairs, and then these two pieces that look like, I guess, photographs or prints or paintings. And it's funny because the guy framing them for me in London, after 2 weeks of working on the frames, he was like, "How do you print these?" And I was like, "They're not prints, they're sculptures. They're real objects that I've set into resin, like a very thin, 5mm deep layer of resin, but I've pigmented the resin so that the objects seem to disappear into this infinite darkness. It's very much like when you put your hand into a murky pond and your hand just disappears after a few inches. It's the same idea, but you'll see that there's a lot of cats in them, and there's some of the cats that didn't make it into the orchestra. They arrived broken, or I broke them by accident, and they obviously, they lost their voice at that moment because they no longer had the volume and the resonance. And this body of work basically does take real objects and turns them into images. And so these very iconic icons actually, little fetish gods, were a perfect thing to transform into images of themselves. And there's broken cats, but there's also fragments of objects from my life and other musical elements. And these recomposition works become almost like the antithesis to the paintings. Like the paintings are so ephemeral and so fleeting. The sound that made them is gone, But these objects, there's like a real violin in one of them, and that violin is completely frozen in time, along with the metronome, which will never click again. It's this kind of turning an object into almost just a testament to itself and to the people that had it and used it and made music with it.
But there's something very curious about them, because I gather that you've gathered them from, like, there's detritus. They're like things you found sometimes on the ground, and then the resin is brown. So then you think of a mud puddle. So you think, oh, these objects, it's kind of murky, but yet they're chipper, they're perky. So there's something, this duality or something.
Yeah, there's a drag outfit in one of them. There's lots of sequins in one of them. Is it like a drag outfit in one of them as well? Like it's true that there's things from my life.
Yeah.
They make their way into those. They become like a diary. And actually, the paintings are all also a diary. I name them after songs that I've been listening to at the time that I've been working on them. So this is named after a song by Serpent with Feet, and. There's an FKA Twigs title in the next room as well. They become also very personal. Yeah, guys, so I'm going to play for like 5-7 minutes or something like that. And I guess the thing to remember is as I'm playing this instrument, every time I press down a key, the keyboard isn't making any sound, it's just turning on the microphones. So the whole time we've been talking, the cats have been quietly singing away to themselves, but I'll be just amplifying those sounds,